There are few sights uglier, in my experience, than a pack of reptiles, especially in an era of social distancing, literally climbing on top of each other. A goat, you know what, standing on top of each other to take pictures of each other, taking pictures of their quarry. A quarry who is supremely uninteresting to most people. Most people had never heard of him until this, because, hey, Twitter isn't Britain and social media is not the world. But all he's doing is actually putting a bicycle into the boot of his car. But his wife and his small child, a toddler, are terrified indoors at the incredible scrum of scum outside. Now, I'm not a hypocrite, you see. I used to say that every single day when Norman Smith and the rest of the reptiles were camped outside the door of Jeremy Corbyn, just so we could get yet another picture of Jeremy Corbyn coming out of his front door, closing it, and walking past them into a taxi. It is a gross waste of journalistic effort, especially when there's so much else to report. That which they extraordinarily, consistently fail to report. There was no press pack at the Elephant and Castle food bank yesterday in the heart of London, when hundreds upon hundreds of people were queuing for free food because they had no money to buy food for themselves. There is no press pack outside our care homes where our government has killed, and I say that word advisedly, has killed thousands of old age pensioners. And they didn't die, they were killed. And anyone who reads, I wouldn't normally recommend it, the Sunday Times report today, can be in no doubt whatsoever that our British government is willfully responsible for the deaths of thousands of our people during the 22 days when they did absolutely nothing at all, even though they knew this scourge of the coronavirus was coming our way. Now, did Dominic Cummings break the lockdown? I don't know, to be perfectly frank. Arguably not on the first occasion. If there was a second occasion, let alone a third, then undoubtedly he did. But then a third of our people have broken the lockdown. 1/3. That's roughly 22 million British people have broken the lockdown. I myself have not. No one has more scrupulously observed the terms of the lockdown than me. And that's why I feel in a solid position to comment on this whole affair. But then there isn't a lockdown. There's no meaningful lockdown. And there has been no meaningful lockdown. Live on air just a couple of weeks ago, I brought you the breaking news. In fact, it was the last time that Boris Johnson spoke to the nation, when he told us that we had to go back to work. What kind of lockdown tells the mass of millions of British workers that they must go back to work? That's not a lockdown. When they told us, backed by Sir Keir Starmer, where is he, by the way, that our children had to go back to school on June the 1st, next week, when we have absolutely no idea whether there's a spike in coronavirus cases coming down the pipe as a result of the virtual abolition of the lockdown announced a couple of weeks ago by Boris Johnson. But then there was no lockdown right from the start. A lockdown is what you had in China, in Wuhan, where nobody is out, where everybody is in, and where the streets are being disinfected, where aeroplanes are not allowed to take off, buses not allowed to run, trains stopped, not allowed to go anywhere, the people not allowed to leave Wuhan, and the rest of China not allowed to enter. That's a lockdown. That's what you call a lockdown. And it was astoundingly successful, both because the Chinese government has the organizational capability and the nous, and I'd argue the commitment to the public health of their people, to carry it off, none of which our government was remotely in possession of. A lockdown is what you had in Spain, where nobody was allowed out for weeks. No exercise, with thousands of people panting on each other as they jog past each other. That isn't a lockdown. If I'd been in charge of this country, my lockdown would have looked like the Chinese lockdown, and our death toll would look like the Chinese death toll. Instead, we have the second highest death toll in the entire world, the second worst outcome in the entire world. Now, you may think that's a coincidence, or you may think it's just down to the fact that both of the leaders of Britain and the United States are blonde bombshells. But I prefer not to weave conspiracy theories, not to look in the crystal ball, but to read the book of condolences. You see, the proof of every pudding is in the eating. And the proof of Boris Johnson's government's pudding is in the grave. It's in the grave where 62 or 63,000 people now lie dead. Almost 60,000 deaths above average in the 3 months. That's all. Not even 11 weeks since this virus hit our shores and this day. So we ain't had no lockdown. And that which we had was effectively abolished by Boris Johnson. And a third of our people are breaking regularly the lockdown. I met people just yesterday, well known to me, who were on their way into somebody's garden party. Now, they may or may not have maintained social distancing, but I was shocked nonetheless, because I have not only myself scrupulously observed this lockdown, I've been demanding a lockdown earlier, lasting longer, and being a proper lockdown. It's not a lockdown when you allow 24 million people to fly into Britain, oftentimes from places that are raging with coronavirus infection. Yes, 24 million from New York, from Madrid, from Paris, from China, all over the world. 24 million of them. And then they get off the plane, no one even takes their temperature, never mind attempts to quarantine them. They get onto the London Underground, where, if they've got it, they're infecting half the people in the carriage and killing a significant number of transport staffs. You've not got a lockdown when you haven't even given the bus driver a little mask that he can put on. You haven't got a lockdown when you're instructing the bus driver that he can't keep his front door shut. He's got to take the fares. That's not a lockdown. That's a joke. Now, Dominic Cummings, as I said in the very beginning, is a right-wing libertarian runt who, I believe, is partly responsible for the herd immunity eugenics project, which I believe has been the policy of our government from the very beginning. But they ran away from the consequences of that when it was signaled to them that openly practicing herd immunity would lead to the deaths not just of hundreds of thousands of British people, but most of them elderly, and therefore a very good chance of Conservative voters. Now, I know there are people out there, probably don't call themselves right-wing, but are nonetheless libertarian runts, who in their heart, if they were honest, are prepared to shrug off the fact, like Dominic Cummings, that, well, if some pensioners have to die, so be it. But you see, I don't think it's more acceptable to allow the elderly and the infirm and those with underlying conditions to die. I think it's less acceptable, because I happen to believe that there is such a thing as society. Not just me and now, but us and always. And I judge a society on how it treats the most vulnerable of its citizens. Don't you? Well, I'm afraid to say there are rather a significant number on the right, but also people who regard themselves on the left, who don't, in the end, actually see it that way. Keir Starmer, for one. Keir Starmer revealed in the Telegraph, behind a paywall, which is his wont, that he's been sending his children to school throughout the crisis, and that he is backing Boris Johnson, sending all our children, well, except those from the elite who go to the private schools, back to school on the 1st of June. Well, my school-age children will not be going back on the 1st of June. In fact, as a rough rule of thumb, they will not be going back to school until Eton goes back to school, until the children of Jacob Rees-Mogg go back to school. Mine will be schooled at home, where, by the way, the education system has done a pitiful job in our children could have all been given a laptop computer, and education could have continued virtually as normal, at home, 9 o'clock to 3:30 every day. But it didn't happen. Not here, at least. Though it happened in other countries, like China and like South Korea and like Singapore and many other countries that one never imagined one day we'd be comparing ourselves unfavorably to. Now, of course, the Dominic Cummings is not the only story in the country, though you'd be forgiven for imagining otherwise. There are many other stories, not just in Britain, but breaking around the world. The most important, of course, of those is the absolutely gaping possibility of actual war between the United States and China. You think I'm being fanciful? The United States, having earlier withdrawn from the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, the INF Treaty, has now withdrawn from the Open Skies Treaty, had already withdrawn from the Iran nuclear deal, has effectively scrapped phase 2 of its trade deal with China, has introduced into its Senate a resolution to delist Chinese companies from the New York Stock Exchange. Individual United States administrations in the States have begun legal proceedings to confiscate hundreds of billions of dollars of China's assets. The United States has gone onto the offensive in Hong Kong, joined by Fat Pang, the fat plutocrat, former governor of Hong Kong, from London, thousands of miles away. He's in the papers today, warning China most severely about what it must do in China. Fat Pang, The days when Britain could cut the heads off Chinese people are gone forever. Fat Donald Trump, the days when China can be ordered what to do by you are long gone. That's why when Donald Trump sends his heavy strategic bombing fleet, not making this up, into the South China Sea to join the warships so plentiful they're bumping into each other in the South China Sea, begins a reversal of Richard Nixon's policy that there's only one China and that Taiwan is a province of China, and begins what are effectively new diplomatic relations and recognition between the United States and Taiwan, whilst ramping up weapons sales from the United States to Taiwan. And when Donald Trump declares economic war against China, this whole scenario rests on one improbable hypothesis, and that is that China will agree to be pushed around, bullied, insulted, and traduced. I'm here to tell you that isn't true. And so the moment is coming fast when China's pushback against the witch hunt against China will be contested. It started in Australia, which, as one Chinese commentator put it, is the gum on China's shoe. The Australian economy, heavily dependent on trade with China, but which joined the United States in its attempt to scapegoat China for the coronavirus, has just been stood on like a piece of gum by the Chinese decision to effectively cease all exports of goods and services from Australia to China. Of course, Australia is free to say what it likes, insult China as it likes, but words and actions have consequences, as Australia is about to find out, and as the United States is about to find out too. This is the mother of all talk shows. I'm glad you're with me. I hope you'll stick with us until 10 o'clock London time this evening for the next 2.5 hours or more. I'm taking your calls, your tweets. I'm taking your messages. It's the mother of all talk shows.
Radio Sputnik.